who are the philanthropic, effective altruist elites who give to some and not others?
Well, there are people, and they're particularly, Silicon Valley billionaires, some of the wealthiest people in the world, who have decided to give their money away according to the principles of effective altruism, which is a philosophy that suggests the best way to do good in the world is to maximize the bang for your buck. So make sure you're saving as many lives as possible with your money. And that means don't give with your heart. Don't give to a charity because it's a cancer charity and your mother died of cancer. Don't be swayed by the leaflet with the puppy on it or the video of, orphans in rubble because of some big disaster. You must try and see where your money can go furthest. And there are some people like the second person ever to be involved in Facebook, who's called Dustin Moskovitz. He used to share a room with Mark Zuckerberg. He has a philanthropic foundation that is giving away $11 billion of his money in his lifetime. And they are using these principles of effective altruism, treating philanthropy and doing good like a science. How are we going to make sure that the money we give away goes furthest?
That's fascinating, because I've always heard effective altruism, and I'm one of those people who didn't actually look up what it really meant. But that does sound like what it, is written on the tin, isn't it? Effective altruism. Yeah. So are there negatives to this?
Well, it requires you to have a kind of cold-hearted view of doing good. And it requires you to shut your eyes to the emotional appeal of things around you. So when I was going to these foundations in San Francisco to interview the people charged with giving this money away, I was literally stepping over homeless people in crisis, sleeping on the streets of San Francisco. According to the principles of effective altruism, homeless people, drug addicts, people in mental health crisis represent poor investments, poor philanthropic investments, because you can save many more lives if you give money to pay for mosquito nets in Africa or deworming tablets in Africa. And so it's a mindset that requires you to shut your eyes and ears to the world around you as you see it and just look at cold, hard data. And it also means that you're prepared to ask really, some would say, distasteful questions like, okay, I've got this money to give away. Who should I save? At what point in someone's life should I intervene? Is it worse if a newborn dies or if a mother of children dies? And there are people in the effective altruism movement who've really thought about this. And I listened to a podcast of one guy who had come up with this formula. He plotted it on a graph and it determined the worst age to die is 8 years old, because by the time you're 8, you have many lives, many years ahead of you, but you've also made meaningful connections in your life, which means your death would affect other people as well.
Wow.
And it also means you've got to do things like the philosopher who's one of the big names connected to effective altruism was asked in a debate, I think in 2015, this thought experiment was put to him, which was, if you were standing in front of a burning building and there was a child trapped in one room and a Picasso in the other room, your philosophy would mean that you saved the Picasso and not the dying child, because you could save many more dying children if you saved the Picasso. And this philosopher said, yeah, I would save the Picasso.
Well, who was that?
Will MacAskill. He's a very, very successful, he's the youngest professor of philosophy in the world, I think, when he was made a professor at Oxford. He's a very brilliant man. He's written lots of books. But yeah, he is the father of effective altruism. He's the one who came up with the name effective altruism.
That's extraordinary. So I suppose to really do the most altruistic thing possible, you have to be something of a psychopath.
Well, you have to have a particular kind of mindset, which I don't have. And when I interviewed Will MacAskill, he said, look, witches used to be burnt at the stake. In the beginning of the scientific method, people thought they were heretics. And he would see himself as a heretic because he would say, I'm just applying the scientific method to doing good. And yes, you might think that my approach is awful, but I think from his perspective, where I was coming from was kind of primitive and unevolved, and that one day I would kind of catch up.
It's such a weird one, though. I guess I don't think there's a right or wrong with some of this stuff. You'd have to think it's a little bit like I was looking into Immanuel Kant, because that's the kind of thing I do on a daily basis. And his idea of truth, you have to always tell the truth no matter what, even if a Nazi guard is at your door saying, are you harboring a Jew up there? Whatever it is, you have to tell the truth. And I read Sam Harris wrote a thing about it called Lying as well, and he also is a truth purist. But then he said to actually do this in real life, you would have to be a psychopath. So you'd like to think that this philosopher, Will MacAskill, would actually save an 8-year-old rather than the Picasso.
Yes, you would like to think that, and you'd like to think that most of us would, because we're not computational devices for maximizing benefit to the world. That's the whole thing. It's just that the Silicon Valley billionaires who are taking this philosophy on are taking it on as if it really was an instruction manual for life, because it turns everything into a kind of computer game, doesn't it? Like, how many lives did you save? How many points have you scored? And what it realistically means is that all the money is going towards the cheapest lives to save, which are kids in Africa.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. Do you get the impression that these elite philanthropic altruists are competing with one another? I always remember this. I've mentioned it a couple of times, but it's one of my favorite Curb Your Enthusiasm moments. Larry David, he donates a wing to a hospital, and it says like, "By Larry David." And Ted Danson, his rival, does it on the other side of the hospital, but by anonymous. And then everyone's like, "Oh, Ted is so lovely. He put it on." There's that kind of competitive altruism. Is that going on? I
think these people would say no, that they're not being competitive about it. That altruism is purely about doing good for others. It's not about having the highest score of lives saved. But if you're looking at goodness purely in terms of numbers, you can't help but compare, I'm sure. And these foundations are all very proud of how much money they're giving away. They do disclose that, so I'm sure there's an element of that.
Who are we talking about, really? Are we talking about like Jeff Bezos and his mates, Elon Musk?
So I think Elon Musk he's been connected to Will MacAskill. I mean, I don't know if you followed the whole business with Sam Bankman-Fried, but when Elon Musk's dealings with Twitter were going through the courts, when he tried to back out of buying Twitter, lots of his texts to Will MacAskill about Sam Bankman-Fried and whether or not he would invest, they would disclose this. He's certainly involved in the movement. Dustin Moskovitz, who is he's the head of Asana at the moment, but he's also got lots of shares in Meta because he was Mark Zuckerberg's roommate. Bill Gates has also said that he's very interested in effective altruism. And of course, I mean, you can understand why it's a good thing in a way to say, I want my money to not be wasted. I want it to go as far as possible. And there are many charities that are extremely wasteful, that spend lots of money on employees having business class fares from place to place and not necessarily on saving lives. I think most people would want to make sure that when they give money to charity, it goes to helping people the most. It's just when you take it to an extreme that it becomes a bit cold.
A bit inhuman. And Bill Gates has been accused of that. Have you seen, like, the internet hates that guy? I'm going to get shouted at for this, but I don't actually understand why. He seems all right, doesn't he?
Well, I think the internet generally hates, the internet generally hates wealthy people who have done very well and are quite nerdy, but that's not true at all, because there's Elon Musk that the internet generally loves, don't they?
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's interesting. I wonder what that's about. They think that Bill Gates is trying to do all the stuff with the vaccines, and I don't know what.
Microchip people.
Tom Hanks as well. Have you seen that?
No. What, people don't like him?
Yeah, I won't go into it, because then it would seem like I'm repeating the stuff about him, but I've just not seen evidence for it at all. It's just like the nicer and wealthier someone is, I think that's when they start to become a target. So let's never become nice or wealthy.
Yeah, no danger of that.
No, we'll never be nice. Who decides what drugs are worth saving people?
Well, in the UK, the NHS has to pay for drugs, and NICE, the National Institute for Clinical Excellence, decides which drugs to recommend be available on the NHS. And they are prepared to spend £20,000 to £30,000 a year on, they're prepared to spend £20,000 to £30,000 per year of life in good health that a drug or a treatment will give you and me. And they have this number, £20,000 to £30,000 per quality adjusted life year.
Is that per person? Like on
that's
you?
Per person. So if this drug will give you an extra 10 years of life in good health and it costs £300,000, they'll pay for it. If it's £400,000 for those extra 10 years, they won't pay for it. It's too much, you die. And this number, I was investigating this, and I thought this number must come from, they look at the budgets, they look at the number of people that the NHS has to serve, they do some maths. No, they've plucked this number out of the air, £20,000 to £30,000 a year that they'll spend. It comes from when NICE was first founded in the late 90s. That was how much dialysis costs for a year. And the point is, the number is a kind of token that allows them to compare different drugs for different conditions. So it's hard to compare whether or not a cancer drug would help a gene therapy that would save the life of a child with a rare disease. But if you say we are prepared to spend this amount for each year of life in good health that it gives you, then it allows different treatments to be compared, basically.
So does that mean there might be drugs out there that could save a lot of lives, but we're not putting them forward because they're expensive?
Yes, it does. But then quite often the pharmaceutical companies know that the NHS is prepared to spend £20,000 to £30,000 per quality adjusted life year. So there'll be a little dance between the pharmaceutical companies and NICE when they're deciding how to price these drugs.
Interesting. Do you have concerns about Big Pharma?
I think that because they know that there are certain drugs that people will pay anything for, they will price anything for those drugs. So as part of my reporting, I looked into a gene therapy called Zolgensma, which is for a condition called spinal muscular atrophy, which is like the most cruel disease that you can imagine. Babies are born, the ones that have the most extreme forms of spinal muscular atrophy, and it is the most common genetic condition that babies are born with in this country. You're born with this condition, the baby looks totally fine, and then the baby just stops having control of its muscles very slowly, and then can't breathe, can't swallow, never learns to walk, and after something like 90% of all babies with it will die before the age of 2. This drug, one dose of it, will just stop this disease in its tracks, will cure this condition. But the company behind it, Novartis, has charged £1.7 million for this drug. And so the NHS had to decide whether or not they could supply it, and NICE were doing all of these consultations to see whether or not they would pay for it. And eventually they worked out by looking at lots of different things, including how many quality adjusted life years it would give to a baby. And this is a baby, has the rest of its life ahead of it. They worked out it was cost effective to pay for this drug. So they have paid for this drug. But I think charging £1.7 million for a drug is kind of outrageous. I know you need to incentivize research into rare conditions, but it does feel like you're holding these babies to ransom, basically.
Do you think they knew that there was more of an emotional pull and that they would be able to use that to up the price?
Completely. And if you look at the website of Zolgensma, it's horrible. It's all videos of like babies celebrating their first and second birthdays. It's babies getting up and taking their first steps. They know that parents who have babies who've got this condition will be Googling Zolgensma and will see all of this stuff. And this is stuff they dream to see for their child walking or having a birthday cake, being alive to their second birthday. So they're completely pulling on those levers. And they want patients to be demanding the drug, and they know that they can charge almost anything for it.
Oh, wow. But now people can get that on the NHS.
They can, yes, in the UK. But then, you're just as likely to be born with this condition in many other countries. And in many other countries, you can't get hold of it. I don't know if they still do this, but Novartis used to hold this lottery for children who were living in countries where it wasn't free at the point of delivery, which is just incredibly cruel as well. It's a kind of Hunger Games thing. Put your name in and maybe your life will be safe, but maybe not. Aren't we nice? We're giving away 100 free doses a year. It was really cruel.
Wow.